Okay, so chapter 37, Song of Mornius. I'm so caught up now in posting the videos that I'm actually in the process of writing chapter 38 because half of that chapter was missing. So I've had to pretty much rewrite that almost the whole chapter of chapter 38, which is almost done, but that's how close my video posting is to what I'm working on. Chapter 37 also had a scene that I decided the original version was, I didn't really like something about the original version, so chapter 37 required a whole new scene. I mentioned in a previous video that I had to write something new from scratch for chapter 37, and that would be the scene with Tarek entering the tent. You'll see when you hear it. That whole scene is new. So and that's how I write now versus how I wrote before, although a lot of the old stuff has been updated, hopefully, so there's not a huge difference in the way I write as far as then versus now. So anyway, I'm getting to the point where I'm running out of printed material and I'm going to have to start writing from scratch. Not there yet, but getting closer. So it's kind of scary. Anyway, nobody answered my question. I was just trying to get reader input about Tarek. After the last chapter, I was wondering what my readers would like to see. Should Tarek off Felrina, or should he grant her mercy? Not going to change what happens. I'm just curious to know what readers think about the whole thing. So, and I say that plural when I think there might just be three or at the most 4 people reading this, but still, you know, readers sounds a lot better than reader. So anyway, chapter 37. Song of Mornius, chapter 37. Felrina sat with her head bowed, her eyes dripping with silent tears. Reaching out, Virgen touched her cheek gently. She shuddered and pulled away. "It's as I thought," Virgen whispered. Carefully he stepped back. Galen climbed to his feet and stumbled. Catching him, Virgen helped him totter a few steps around the fire. "What is?" Galen motioned to the prisoner. "I want to understand. What's wrong with her that Halram hasn't healed?" Virgen kicked at the fire. "Perhaps Tarek is right and she deserves all this. Maybe she deserves to die too, and maybe she will. But," he lowered his voice, "I cannot abide rape, staff wielder. That woman's been raped. I'm guessing several times." "Raped?" Galen stared at the captain, and then followed at his side toward the tents. "My sister Elan was also violated," Virgen told him, stopping by Avalar's. "A man riding through our land caught her checking on her snares. He had his way with her at knife point. First, I eviscerated him, after I caught him fleeing like a coward. I took intestine from his belly, looped it around the back of Hawk's saddle, and let my horse wander. Then I shoved his balls down his throat." "There was a dog pack that hunted that wood," Virgen said, grinning fiercely. "When I heard them baying, I climbed on Hawk and left. The last thing I heard was his screams." His grin held as he stared at the snow. "They lasted a good while." Galen stared at the gruff-spoken, gentle human he thought he knew. "You're a good man, Virgen," he said. "I can't believe you'd kill like that." Virgen's gaze settled on his face. "Neither could I, but I did. Even ironwood snaps in a gale when the wind is strong enough, and the same is true for people." Galen swayed on his feet, leaned suddenly against Virgen. As he tried to pivot from the captain's hard stare, tears filled his eyes. "I snapped once," he admitted softly. "Ah," said Virgen, "so I've heard. Well," again he grinned, "I hope it was messy. If you're going to lose control and then have to feel guilt for it for the rest of your life, you might as well do a thorough job." Yes, Galen shivered at the memory. It was thorough. He was aware of Felrina nearby, her red-rimmed eyes watching his face. "And I do feel guilty. I know what it's like to be hurt." Virgen led him to a tree and helped him down. When we're old, we'll both have bloody tales to tell, assuming we live that long. But for now I must cook that Deerdil Roth shot, and he nodded to Filrena and lowered his voice. Only time will heal her, staff-wielder. Don't bother asking Halram to do it. He can't. Not this time. And you're sick enough as it is. Galen leaned trembling against the tree's wide trunk as Virgin stomped his way toward the Shan. From the darkness of deepening twilight, Avalar approached the fire, nodding at Virgin as she bent to retie the prisoner's wrists. As Virgin rummaged through his various packs, Galen saw Mornius slide from the ties holding it and clatter to the frozen ground. Its skystone winked at him in the flickering firelight like a silver-blue promise of coming dawn. Through the tense, thin leather, Filrena huddled under her borrowed furs, gazing at the flickering glow from the camp's single fire, listening to the voices of the men sitting there. Outside the door flap of the tent, the giant kept watch. She detected the slow approach of footsteps, Tarek's voice speaking softly to the giant. With a grunt, Avalar stood. There came a soft, shushing sound of leather as Tarek entered the darkened tent. She closed her eyes, pressing her face to the fur beneath her head. Beside her, she heard his breathing, heard him pause for a long moment, then the slow creak of leather as he seated himself. Virgin has described some of your injuries to me, he said softly. It seems you became like what you killed, Filrena, Melian's victim. I remember what Pony said, that you were deceived. You've paid a hell of a high price for it, haven't you? Do you recall how I tried to talk you out of joining that cult in the first place? I never trusted that man, remember? Filrena nodded, grateful for the darkness that spared her from the loathing on his face. I'm no executioner, Tarek continued. She heard him lean forward, then felt the weight of more furs being placed over her back. My heart aches for my brother, and he loved you. I can't honestly imagine ending the life of someone Cameron loved, or anyone unarmed and vulnerable. Lieutenant Ross' father and brothers were taken by your cult. His sister and mother left gutted like Deerdil for him to find when he came home. Roth wants to kill you and begs me to let him. I could, but I won't. If I did, it would be the same as if I did it myself. It would still be my command, my decision, ending your life. Filrena held her breath, letting her tears run silently into the furs. She lifted her hands, slid her curled fingers protectively under her neck. You, said Tarek sternly, will dedicate your efforts from now on to helping us end Malian. You, with your knowledge of his demison, will help Argus guide us to its very heart, to the place where he hoards his power. There we will stop this monster once and for all. She gasped. I have to go back there, she whispered. But he... Yes, said Tarek. You owe it to Cameron to be brave, Filrena. You owe it to us all. Tomorrow you'll walk free. Avalar will watch you, but that's all. If you try to run, then we'll revisit this topic of Roth and his sword, and I don't think that's something you want. Slowly, Filrena rolled to her side where she could see the glow from the fire silhouetting his features. With effort, she gulped back the cries in her throat at the thought of men's. Silent tears streamed her face as she looked at the glint of firelight in his eyes staring down. I don't know if I can go back there, Tarek. After what There was a tense pause. Rage shivered in the air. Immediately regretting her words, Filrena held her breath. You're not alone this time, Tarek told her finally. For now you're my prisoner and my responsibility. I won't let him, his voice tightened, touch you again. The others know. Slowly Tarek rolled to his knees and then hunkered above her. They've been informed and instructed not to discuss this with you, not even Roth. And you, with the toe he nudged her leg, you're not permitted to speak Cameron's name in my presence again. Understood? Yes, she whispered softly. Anything. Tarek, Good. There was a thump of an awkward footstep as he wheeled toward the door. Tarek? She whispered his name at the darkness he left behind. She heard him pause. Verena swallowed. Do you? The tears came faster now, burning down her face. Hate me? She heard his slow breathing as he mulled it over. All his life he had thought things over carefully first. How she wished now she had done the same thing. Don't you suffer enough right now? He asked softly. Then he paused. Hate and rage aren't the same thing. I hate Malian, he said. For you, I feel pity, among other things. I know what you hoped for at the start. I know it wasn't this. Again there was a tense pause. Henceforth you will refer to me by my title, said Tarek. Commander Florin. To me you're like a stranger now. You've forfeited the right to use my name. Through her tears she heard the soft sighing of leather as the tent flap fell shut. Galen roused at the sound of battle, of feet stomping the ground, heavy bodies struggling back and forth. For a moment he lay frozen, staring at the darkness within the little tent. A weight crashed onto him, ripping through the tent's waxed leather. Galen thrashed as the icy roof settled heavy on his head. The body on his legs rolled over, then jerked back and forth. Galen heard the sickening crack of steel shearing through bone. Warmth flooded over his legs, and he gagged at the smell. With a dull thud, the weight rolled off him. Hands seized his ankles, lifted him clear. Dangling with his shirt draped over his head, he flailed at the air with his fists. Be still, warned Abelard sternly. He heard a hiss as she sheathed her great sword. Then she turned him in her grasp, setting him on his feet. Easy, giant, Tarek called from the darkness. It's over. The Shan went after the rest. Abelard stood beside Galen, her hunched shoulders trembling with heated blood. How many? She asked. She jerked up her head, shook away her long, unbraided hair to see. How many did we slay? Galen stared at the corpse inside the crumpled tent. Split in half below the ribs, it lay with its arms open, its glistening innards slumped to the snow. Even as he watched, the tail twitched spasmodically, as if the tortured flesh still fought against death. You were a man once, Galen whispered. 5, Tarek was saying. It was a patrol. Dren saw them coming half a league back. Somehow they knew we were here. The Shan chased them? Galen turned from the Veelerman. Deep in his heart he felt Holrum's rage, his hatred of needless destruction. Clenching his fists, Galen forced his thoughts to more immediate things. The Veelermen are dead, he thought, nothing to be done about it now. Tarek nodded. We see now why the Eris value the creature so much. They change when they sense danger. Change? Galen, chewing his lower lip, struggled to visualize the creatures. With their thick bodies and stumpy legs, they were impervious to the cold, yet nothing about the little cone feeders seemed dangerous. The prisoner, said Abelard. Oh, Sales, I forgot about her. Turning, she rushed to the ruin of her tent and shouldered her way in. Galen stared into space, frowning at his muddled thoughts. Then he heard voices shout a warning beyond the trees. Shapes lumbered toward them, blowing and stamping, bugling fiercely. Dripping blood from their lips, the 5 Shan entered the light of the little fire, their bodies shifting subtly as they moved into what they had been before, but not before Galen saw the clawed toes still protruding above each cloven hoof, or the shrinking bloody tusks as long as his forearms. Björgen and Roth trailed behind the beasts. Roth with his bare chest streaked with blood, Björgen still grim-faced from the battle. Passing Tarek, Björgen went straight to the little fire and knelt. With the tip of his dagger he prodded at the brands, coaxing the flames higher. There's no point in that now, Captain, Tarek said. He scowled as Avalar re-emerged from her tent, the limp and exhausted prisoner in her arms. After a pause, he continued, directing his words at his men. They know we're here, he said. Somehow they know, and he shot a withering glare at Filrina. I have a few ideas how they know. We must hurry now and find those mines. Good, said Roth. I'll be glad to get away from this snow. Tarek nodded to Filrina. Avalar, wake her. Standing beside him, Galen touched his arm. Believe me, Tarek, she has suffered. I don't think... Enough, Tarek said. Galen followed his gaze to Avalar. As Galen watched, Avalar gently pressed ice from the tents to the woman's forehead. Filrina stiffened in her sleep and thrashed, her hands weakly clutching Avalar's arms. I don't blame her, Virgin said, watching beside the fire. I wouldn't want to wake up either, if I were her. At that, Tarek scowled. He raised his hand. That's enough, Giant, he said gruffly. Let her be for now. Let her sleep. Galen stood shivering, clutching his staff as the warriors hurried to salvage and pack what they could from the trampled camp. Beside him, Avalar waited patiently. As the woman's newly appointed guard, she had different responsibilities now, so she watched as her gear was stowed, a task she had always done herself. The mines must be near, Galen said. You said 2 days' journey, and we've traveled a whole day. She nodded gravely. They are near. He held up his hands, letting the giant see how they trembled. Pony told me I'd get stronger with Halram joined with me, he told her, but all it does is make me sick. He's burning me alive. Unable to meet the quiet sympathy of her regard, he turned his face toward the west and the growing light of the dawn. When my stepfather slew my mother, I felt like you do now. I knew then how it feels to hate. You hate, Avalar. You're burning too, all the time with it. I feel it. Above his head, Avalar stared down intently. You beheld your own mother's? Yes. He gripped his staff, hugging it tight to his chest as he stood and waited. It happened when Seth Laval discovered she had love for another man, a trail peddler and sideshow mage. I was a child then. He had them hold me and made me watch while... Hush. Reaching down, Avalar pressed a firm finger to his lips. With a groan, he turned from her shocked dismay, his arms clenching his chest. Galen! Tarek's command cracked through his turmoil. He glanced toward his friend. Both Roth and Virgin had mounted, while Dren, Silva, and Tarek remained on foot with their bright swords drawn. At Tarek's firm gesture, Galen hurried toward the remaining Shan. For a time he rode in silence, his staff across his lap, his hand soft on the reins in his grasp. Beside him, Avalar walked woodenly, cradling Filrina's limp form. Through the haze of illness, Galen studied the giant, how she flinched from unseen whips and cowered at times as if below a low ceiling. She muttered in her language, her hands reaching time and again for the pommel of her sword. Only the prisoner in her arms seemed to link her to the present. While Filrina tossed and fretted through her nightmares, Avalar crooned softly as if to a child. Perhaps she's seen a child, thought Galen. More and more he realized the world the giant experienced and responded to was no longer their own. Galen blinked as the dawn spread across the western sky, painting it lavender blue. Above his head the branches glittered silver. He focused on the mountain rising from behind the fog, the proud white slopes that they struggled to reach. Brightened by morning, the sky-white peaks gleamed through the mist, their ancient sides blanketed with snow. He shivered at the sight. Here was beauty so close he could touch it. He could see where the forest opened its arms, embracing the mountain's wide flanks. The sun split the horizon, spilling its fire across Warder's Fall to the north and west, a dead wasteland of endless, shattered hills. Galen followed the slow march of sunlight, watched it ooze like liquid metal along a scar that would never heal, a pathway seared over the once healthy land. It marked the route taken by Malian long ago to the magma-scarred slopes of Mount Chestnut. Crouched and dead in the midst of sky-white splendor, Malian's peak was half obscured still by the fog. It was a fire mountain, Avalar had told him at the Eris village, empty on the inside, filled up with darkness and fire. Small and misshapen like a wounded beast, it had collapsed along one side where the Shakaya River pierced its rotten flank like a lance. Abruptly Galen leaned back in his saddle, and his creature stopped behind the giant. As the others rode on oblivious, Avalar bent stiffly, stretching Felrina on the icy ground at her feet. The woman shivered at the sudden cold, then flailed herself awake. Ignoring her, Avalar stood with her legs braced, her blazing eyes focused on a white clearing beyond the trees. Avalar? Galen dismounted. He was vaguely aware of Tarek ahead, shouting for the others to stop. "Sails!" Avalar whispered. Drawing her sword, she started forward at a crouch. Then her voice scaled into a yell. "Nightbringer, slay them!" "Avalar!" Tarek's voice cracked like a whip in the quiet morning, but in the giant something had snapped. With Halram's senses, Galen felt it as she did, sensed the here and now shatter around her like fragile glass. The ghosts of her memories, rising tall from the wounded ground, crowded her, howled at her. She saw their deaths, their imminent peril, suffered their terror with her heart and mind and nerves. "Avalar, no!" Galen yelled to make himself heard. Helpless he watched as she stumbled into a run, slashing her massive blade at the branches in her way. Half sobbing, she crashed among the trees, calling out the names of the dead giants around her. Giants she knew, giants who toiled at her side under the cutting lash of magic and whips. She was deaf to Tarek's commands, to everything but the past from long ago, the time of the slavers born again to claim the present and her life. Raising her sword, she plunged into the snow-white clearing and dropped out of sight. Galen hurried behind her, holding his staff above his head like a spear. Tarek raced past him, his legs pumping as he yanked his blade from its scabbard. Both Silva and Roth pounded by, and then Dren, all of them grim-faced, ready for combat. As Avalar began to scream, he felt he would never reach her. Halram's fire held him back, sapped his strength, and made him ill. He saw the ragged hole in the snow where the giant had fallen, a pit of blackness surrounded by white. He stopped beside Tarek to stare down where the ground had collapsed. Barely through the darkness could he discern the outline of his friend, yet he felt her terror as she stumbled, flailing back and forth, as she threw herself repeatedly at the walls of the open tunnel. Screaming, she clawed at the dirt. With each passing moment, her identity unraveled. The past had claimed her at last, possessing her utterly. "Avalar!" he shouted. Unfocused power tore from his fingers, flashed silver-blue radiance across the little meadow. Braving his fire, Tarek seized his shoulders and held him, shaking him repeatedly until he stopped. "No," said Tarek. "Magic's the last thing she needs. You." "Great leader, wait! Do not leave me!" Galen pulled himself free. "I must," he panted. "That leader she speaks of. Tarek, if she goes with him, that's the end. We won't get her back." "Call Pony," Vurgen shouted from behind them. Galen looked back, saw the older man striding quickly into the meadow, with the prisoner still blinking away sleep at his side. "I remember what you told me he said. We won't get her back when she loses herself." "Well, she's lost herself, Commander." "I need to be sure." Without a word, Tarek knelt beside the hole. His brow furrowed as he stared down. "I'm not losing her." Galen crouched beside him. "You can't go down there. She'll see you as a human from the past, a slaver. She'll tear you apart." Tarek, peering into the darkness, reached with his hands to unfasten his belt and scabbard. Deliberately, Lifting his grim gaze to Galen's face, he placed his sword in the snow.